Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling some really dense source material, an entire legal chapter defining property crime, our goal. To make sense of it all, we're going to translate this complex legal language into something clear, something you can actually use. We're focusing on Chapter 28 of the Penal Code that covers things like property damage, destruction, arson, criminal mischief, the whole spectrum.
Oh, please.
Yeah, it's crucial stuff. It defines everything from, say, simple graffiti right up to, really serious first-degree arson and even newer threats like attacks on critical infrastructure. We're aiming to really pull apart the key differences, like when is it about protecting people versus just protecting economic value? If you've ever wondered what turns minor vandalism into a major felony charge, well, this deep dive is definitely for you. We're going to break it all down. And before we really jump in, if you find this kind of detailed breakdown helpful making sense of complex stuff, please take just a second to subscribe to our channel. It genuinely helps us out a lot, lets us keep making this content and reach more people. Also, don't forget to check out our website. We've got extra resources there, links to the actual statutes we're discussing today, all that good stuff to support this deep dive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And for the next 20, maybe 30 minutes, we'll guide you through this. What's really fascinating, I think, is how the law doesn't just say destruction is bad. It gets really specific. It classifies how serious something is based on, well, mainly three things. First, the mindset, was it intentional, knowingly done, or maybe just reckless? Second, what kind of property was it? A house people live in, or just like an empty field? Big difference. And third, how they figure out the cost, the damage. We call that pecuniary loss. So for you listening, this isn't really about memorizing legal codes line by line. It's more about getting the legal thinking behind it all. We're setting up the framework, understanding what makes one act maybe just carelessness, while another is seen as a major threat to safety or the economy.
Okay, let's get into it then. Our mission today is pretty clear. Figure out what takes simple property destruction and bumps it up into serious felony territory. And like always, we have to start with the basics, the definitions, the vocabulary.
Yeah, definitions first. Always. When you're dealing with legal texts, you absolutely have to understand their specific meanings for words. You skip this, and you risk using, like, the everyday meaning when the law means something very, very precise.
Right, that's a critical point. Let's start with two big ones, habitation versus building. We use them kind of interchangeably sometimes, but legally, huge difference, right? Especially for arson charges.
Huge difference. A habitation, legally speaking, is a structure or vehicle, and this is the key part, that is adapted for the overnight accommodation of persons. That phrase is everything.
Adapted for overnight accommodation, so it doesn't actually have to have someone sleeping in it right then.
Nope, just has to be set up for that purpose. Think potential for sleeping. And the law makes this definition pretty broad, intentionally, to give maximum protection.
How broad are we talking?
Well, it specifically includes each separately secured or occupied portion. So think about an apartment building. Damaging one single apartment, that counts as damaging a habitation. Not the whole building, but that unit. And, crucially, it also includes each structure appurtenant to or connected with the main structure.
Appurtenant to or connected with. Okay, so like an attached garage. Or maybe a laundry room you can get to from the house. Even a shed, if it's physically linked somehow. All part of the habitation legally.
That's exactly right. They are. The law basically draws a bigger protective circle around where people sleep. Imagine someone burns down their detached garage. If that garage is, say, secured and connected, maybe by a breezeway, the charge level could jump significantly because legally it's treated as part of the habitation.
Wow, okay. That really underscores the law's focus on protecting human life there. So what about someone living in an RV or like one of those tiny homes on wheels?
If that RV or tiny home is currently adapted for overnight use, if that's its function, then yes, it qualifies as a habitation under this chapter. That's a really important trigger for higher penalties because of the potential danger to people inside.
Let's try a quick analogy then. So a car someone is actually sleeping in overnight, that's a habitation. But a huge 10-story office building, even if people work there 24/7, but nobody lives there, that's just
a building. Exactly. Perfect contrast. Building is the wider category. It's any structure or enclosure intended for use or occupation.
Yeah.
Could be for living, yes, but also for trade, manufacture, ornament, or use. So yeah, a big empty factory, that's a building. A museum, housing statues, building. A church, a hospital, buildings. But only the places set up for sleeping get that special heightened protection as a habitation.
Okay, that distinction's clear. Now, moving away from structures, property. The definition here looks like it tries to catch absolutely everything.
It really does. It's massive. It covers real property, so land and anything fixed to it,
Hmm.
and tangible or intangible personal property. That means physical stuff, obviously, like a car or a phone, but also things you can't touch, intellectual property, stocks, even digital assets. And crucially, it explicitly includes anything severed from land. And a document, including money, that represents or embodies anything of value.
Hang on. Anything severed from land, what's the practical reason for spelling that out?
Ah, good question. That makes sure natural resources, think oil that's been pumped and stored, or trees that have been cut down into lumber, are clearly defined as property here.
Right.
It stops someone from maybe arguing, well, it came from the land, so it wasn't really property yet.
Yeah.
Closes that potential loophole.
Makes sense. And vehicles, since they get damaged a lot.
Right.
Pretty standard definition.
Yeah, fairly standard.
Yep.
A vehicle includes any device in, on, or by which any person or property is or may be propelled, moved, or drawn in the normal course of commerce or transportation. So cars, trucks, commercial vehicles, even, say, farm equipment if it's used in commerce. Pretty broad.
Okay. And lastly, for definitions, let's nail down these agricultural terms that pop up, especially with arson. Open space land.
Right. Open space land is basically the opposite of a habitation. It's real property that is undeveloped for the purpose of human habitation. Think fields, forests, pastures. This is important because arson law treats burning this kind of land differently. And tied right into that is controlled burning. This is the legal out. It means burning unwanted vegetation, yes, but with the owner's consent, and crucially in a way that the fire is controlled and stays within a designated area. If you're doing that, it's specifically not arson. It allows for necessary farming or land clearing.
Got it. That sets the foundation really well. We know the law isn't just looking at dollar signs, but also at function, especially related to human safety. All right, let's get into arson itself. Section 28.02. This is where that focus on protecting life really comes to the forefront, isn't it?
Absolutely. The core act, the starting point for arson, is initiating a fire or causing an explosion. And here's the key. Doing it with the intent to destroy or damage something. It actually doesn't matter if the fire fizzles out immediately. Just starting it with that destructive intent is enough.
The intent is everything. Did they want to cause damage when they lit that match or set off that device? If the answer is yes, then we look at what they were targeting.
Exactly. Let's look at the first target type, open space land. Remember that definition. Undeveloped land. Arson applies if your intent is to destroy or damage the vegetation, a fence, or some structure on that open space land.
So burning a farmer's crops on purpose or setting fire to a fence out in a field, that's arson.
It is. But, and this is the important exception we just discussed, this charge doesn't apply if it was part of a legitimate controlled burning operation. The law clearly separates malicious destruction from necessary land management.
Okay. Now, here's where it gets significantly more serious. Targeting a building, habitation, or vehicle. For arson, you need that basic intent to destroy, plus something extra, an aggravating factor. Usually it involves knowing something specific about the property or the situation.
Right. These aggravating factors are what elevate the crime. They show the act poses a greater threat maybe to public order, finances, or safety. One factor is knowing the structure is located within the limits of an incorporated city or town.
That one seems a bit unusual at first glance. Why does knowing it's in a city make the arson worse?
It's all about risk. The danger of a fire spreading uncontrollably is much, much higher in a densely populated urban area compared to, say, an isolated rural spot. More buildings nearby, more people at risk.
The potential for collateral damage.
Exactly. However, there's a defense here. If the person actually got a permit beforehand or some written authorization that specifically allows for fires or explosions in that city, that can be a defense. It shows they tried to follow the rules at least.
Okay, so the law essentially says high-risk activity in a high-risk zone needs official approval. Makes sense. What about the financial factors?
These are aimed squarely at fraud. It's arson if you start the fire knowing the property is insured against damage, or knowing it's subject to a mortgage, or some other security interest, like a lien.
So burning your own car to cash in on the insurance policy, that's not just property damage, it's arson because of the intent to defraud the insurance company.
Precisely. Same logic if you burn down a house to get out from under a mortgage, you're intentionally damaging the lender's financial interest.
And, of course, setting fire to property that belongs to someone else or even a building that just contains someone else's property, that meets the requirement too.
Yes. But perhaps the most sweeping factor is what's often called the reckless condition under subsection A2S. This one's different. You don't actually need the intent to endanger life. It's arson. If the person is simply reckless about whether starting that fire or explosion will endanger someone's life or jeopardize the safety of somebody else's property.
Okay, let me try to wrap my head around that. So, say I decide to burn an old shed I own out in the suburbs. My intent is just to get rid of the shed. But maybe I do it on a really windy day right next to my neighbor's wooden fence without taking any precautions. I'm not trying to burn their house down, but I'm being incredibly careless, reckless about the risk that the fire will spread. That recklessness alone is enough.
That's a perfect example. Your recklessness about the potential harm to others elevates your intentional act of burning your shed into the full crime of arson. It's the difference between specific malicious intent towards others and just a dangerous disregard for the consequences. Both can lead to the same serious charge here.
Wow, that's a significant aspect. Now, the statute seems to carve out two even more specific scenarios involving recklessness. Let's look at subsection A1, the drug manufacturing arson.
Yeah, this one's clearly a policy choice by the legislature. It targets the inherent dangers of making illegal drugs. An offense happens if someone recklessly starts a fire or causes an explosion while they are in the process of manufacturing or trying to manufacture a controlled substance, meth labs, blowing up being the classic example. And importantly, that fire has to actually damage a building, habitation, or vehicle. The primary crime they're committing is drug manufacturing, and the fire is a reckless, dangerous consequence of that illegal activity.
So they didn't necessarily intend to cause an explosion, they intended to make drugs, but the process itself is so hazardous that it recklessly led to the fire or explosion.
Exactly. The law focuses on the reckless outcome of that dangerous primary act. This starts as a state jail felony. But, critically, if someone gets hurt, bodily injury, or death results, it immediately jumps up to a felony of the third degree.
Okay. And then there's the flip side, almost, in A2, the intentional act, reckless results scenario. Here, starting the fire is intentional, but the scale of the resulting damage is where the recklessness comes in.
Correct. The person intentionally starts a fire or explosion. Maybe they only intend minor damage, like scorching something. But they are only reckless about whether that fire ends up causing major damage to someone else's building or recklessly causes bodily injury or death.
So maybe I intentionally light a small fire on my neighbor's porch, just intending to scare them or cause a little mess. But I do it carelessly, maybe near flammable materials I didn't account for, and the whole porch catches fire, even threatens the house. My initial act was intentional, but I was reckless about how bad it could get. That triggers this offense.
Precisely. That recklessness regarding the extent of the harm is the key. And that scenario also starts as a state jail felony. The law acknowledges the initial intent, but bases the grading on the reckless consequences.
Okay, let's tie this all back together with the penalties for the main arson offense under subsection A. You mentioned the structure type is often more important than the dollar amount.
That's right. For the standard intentional arson we discussed, first intent plus an aggravating factor. The default penalty level is a felony of the second degree. That's the baseline. Pretty serious already. But here's where the life safety priority really kicks in. It escalates to a first-degree felony, the most serious level below capital murder under two main conditions. One, if bodily injury or death is suffered by anyone as a result of the fire. Or two, if the property the person intended to damage or destroy was a habitation, remember, where people sleep or a place of assembly or worship, like a church, synagogue, mosque, or even community center.
That is a critical point for listeners. Let's contrast that. If I intentionally burn down an empty warehouse causing, say, $500,000 in damage, that's likely a second-degree felony based on the standard rules. But if I intentionally burn down a small $50,000 mobile home where someone lives a habitation that act alone because of the type of structure, triggers a first-degree felony charge.
Exactly. The potential threat to human life inherent in burning a habitation or a place where people gather outweighs the pure monetary value of the property damage in the eyes of the arson law.
Okay, so we've covered arson, which is heavily focused on intent and risk to life. Now let's completely shift gears to section 28.03, criminal mischief. This seems to be where the economic impact takes center stage.
That's generally true. Criminal mischief is more the catch-all for property destruction. The one constant requirement is that the act must be done without the effective consent of the owner. If the owner says, go ahead, it's not mischief. And there are basically three ways to commit this offense according to the statute. First, the one everyone thinks of, intentionally or knowingly damaging or destroying tangible property, smashing a window, keying a car, that kind of thing. Second is tampering with tangible property. But just tampering isn't enough. It has to result in either a measurable pecuniary loss, a monetary cost, or cause substantial inconvenience to the owner or maybe someone else.
substantial inconvenience.
That's interesting. So it doesn't have to be physical damage. Could I, like, disable a security system, causing no damage, but forcing a business to close for a day? Could that be criminal mischief?
Yes, potentially. If that inconvenience is significant enough, causes real disruption, measurable business loss, prevents people from doing necessary things that can qualify under this prong, it recognizes that harm isn't always about breaking things. Sometimes it's about disrupting function. And the third way is specifically about making markings, intentionally or knowingly putting inscriptions, slogans, drawings, paintings, etc., on someone else's tangible property. This is the part that directly covers most acts of graffiti or tagging.
Okay, so 3 ways to do it, but the penalty seems almost entirely driven by the money. Let's walk through that scale because it jumps pretty quickly. Maybe we can use some quick examples for each level. Good idea. It starts really low. If the pecuniary loss, the cost of the damage is less than $100, or the act only caused that substantial inconvenience we talked about, it's just a Class C misdemeanor. Think really minor stuff, like maybe TPing someone's house where the cleanup is just inconvenient, not costly. Then, if the law hits $100 or more, but it's still less than $750, it bumps up to a Class B misdemeanor, maybe breaking a standard window or minor vandalism that needs a bit of repair.
Okay, next level up, the highest misdemeanor. Class A misdemeanor, that's for damage costing $750 or more, but less than $2,500. This could be, I don't know, damaging some more expensive equipment, maybe denting a car door badly enough it needs significant repair.
Exactly. And then we hit the big jump, the first felony level, state jail felony. This kicks in when the loss is $2,500 or more, all the way up to just under $30,000. Now we're talking about maybe totaling an inexpensive car or causing significant damage to landscaping or a building facade.
And it keeps climbing from there based purely on the dollar amount.
Purely on the dollars for these main tiers, yes. $30,000 to less than $150,000 in damage. That's a felony of the 3rd degree. Serious economic harm destroying valuable machinery, significant structural damage to a building. $150,000 up to less than $300,000. Felony of the 2nd degree. And finally, if the damage is $300,000 or more, it's a felony of the 1st degree. We're talking catastrophic destruction of major assets here, leveling a large building, destroying very high-value property, all based on that calculated pecuniary loss. So the main takeaway for criminal mischief penalties is follow the money. The cost of the damage is usually the primary factor determining how serious the charge is.
Usually. But like with arson, it seems the law carves out some special cases where the dollar amount maybe doesn't matter as much or where the felony trigger is much lower, these specialized aggravations.
Exactly. These are situations where the legislature decided the type of property being damaged or the consequences of the damage are so critical to public safety or order that the penalty needs to be higher, regardless of the strict dollar cost. These are like legal shortcuts to felony charges.
Okay, let's look at some of those. Public services seem like a big one.
Huge. If you impair or interrupt a public water supply, even if the actual physical damage costs, say, only $50 to fix, the offense automatically starts at a Class A misdemeanor level. It's a floor. And if you mess with public communications, transportation, or the gas or power supply, if the loss is less than $30,000, the offense floor is already a state jail felony or even potentially a 3rd-degree felony.
Right, because cutting off power or water to a community, even briefly, can have massive ripple effects way beyond the cost of a broken part.
Precisely. The potential harm is societal, and that leads right into the focus on critical infrastructure and metals. If you damage or destroy a copper or brass component think wiring, pipes, that's part of a critical infrastructure facility, like a power substation, and that damage causes impairment or interruption. Automatic 3rd-degree felony.
That's clearly targeting metal theft, right? The thieves might only get a few bucks for the scrap copper, but they can knock out power to thousands.
Exactly. The law recognizes the disproportionate harm.
What about damaging homes again, but without fire? Does criminal mischief treat habitations specially?
It does. If the property damaged is a habitation and the damage is caused by a firearm or an explosive weapon, even if the repair cost is low, say under $2,500, it's automatically treated as a state jail felony at minimum. Firing a weapon into someone's home is just viewed extremely seriously.
And I noticed protections for agriculture in the sources too. Fences.
Yes, specifically fences used for containing certain high-value livestock cattle, horses, exotic game animals managed under license. If you damage or destroy that kind of fence and the loss is less than $2,500, it's still a state jail felony.
Why such strong protection for a fence?
Because breaking that fence doesn't just cost the price of repair, it can lead to the loss or dispersal of incredibly valuable animals, huge recovery costs for the rancher. It protects their livelihood and managed assets.
Makes sense. And then there are some very specific modern targets flagged for higher penalties too. ATMs, catalytic converters.
Right. Tampering with an automated teller machine, ATM, in a way that impairs or interrupts access, that's a third-degree felony, no matter the dollar amount of damage. It hits commerce and public access. And damaging or destroying a vehicle while removing or trying to remove a catalytic converter. That specific act is flagged as a state jail felony. That's a direct legislative response to the huge surge in that particular type of theft.
And we saw that really extreme example too, introducing something like mad cow disease to livestock. That's a first-degree felony.
Yes, it sounds extreme, but it reflects the potential for absolutely devastating economic and public health consequences across an entire industry. The potential harm is astronomical.
Okay, one last bit on criminal mischief is this utility tampering presumption. That sounds like a powerful tool for prosecutors.
It really is. Basically, it says if someone is clearly getting the economic benefit of a utility power, water, gas, and it turns out the supply has been tampered with, meter bypass, connection altered, etc., the law presumes that the person receiving the benefit knew about the tampering.
So the burden shifts. Instead of the state having to prove that you personally messed with the meter, if you're the one using the free electricity, you have to prove you didn't know it was tampered with.
That's the essence of it. It makes it much harder to just claim ignorance when you're directly benefiting from the illegal connection.
All right, so since that pecuniary loss number is so incredibly important for setting the penalty level in criminal mischief, we absolutely need to understand how the courts actually calculate it. It's not just a random guess, right?
Not at all. Section 28.06 lays out pretty specific rules, and they depend on whether the property was destroyed or just damaged. If the property is completely destroyed, gone, kaput, the primary way to calculate the loss is its fair market value at the time and place it was destroyed. What would it have sold for right before it was destroyed? Now, if you can't easily determine that market value, maybe it was a unique item, a family heirloom, something not typically bought and sold, then the law provides a backup, the cost of replacing the property within a reasonable time.
Okay, so if I destroy a standard year-old laptop, they'll look at the market value of a similar used laptop. But if I destroy a one-of-a-kind painting and market value is impossible, they might look at the cost to commission a similar artist to create a replacement.
That's the idea, yes. Now, what if the property is only damaged, meaning it can be repaired or fixed? The calculation method changes. It's not the total value anymore. Instead, the loss is calculated as the cost of repairing or restoring the damaged property within a reasonable time. So if keying a car costs $1,000 to repaint the door, the pecuniary loss is $1,000, not the full value of the car.
Got it. Repair costs for damage, replacement market value for destruction. What about documents? They often have value beyond the paper they're printed on.
Right. The law addresses that too. If the document represents a debt, like an IOU or a promissory note, its value is the amount that's due and collectible on that debt. If it's some other kind of document, maybe a property deed, architectural blueprints, sensitive business records, the loss is defined quite broadly as the greatest amount of economic loss the owner might reasonably suffer because that document is gone. This requires looking at the potential consequences of losing that information or proof.
That sounds like it could get complicated. What if, after trying all these methods, the courts still just cannot determine a reliable dollar value for the loss?
There's a fallback provision for that exact situation. If the amount of pecuniary loss truly cannot be ascertained using the standard criteria, the law automatically deems the loss to be greater than $750 but less than $2,500.
Ah, so it defaults to the Class A misdemeanor range. It prevents the charge from becoming negligible just because the value is hard to pin down.
Exactly. It sets a baseline minimum consequence in those uncertain cases.
Now, this brings up a really interesting point about ownership. What happens if the person who causes the damage actually owns part of the property? Like, say, I get angry and deliberately smash up a boat that I co-own 50-50 with my business partner.
That's addressed in Section 28.05, and it's a crucial point. The law explicitly states that it is not a defense to prosecution that the person causing the damage, the actor, has an interest in the property if another person also has an interest which the actor is not entitled to infringe. So, in your example, your business partner also has a 50% interest. By destroying the boat, you're infringing their rights and their financial stake. Your partial ownership doesn't excuse the crime. Same logic applies if there's a bank loan and a lien on the property. You're damaging the bank's secured interest.
Okay, so co-ownership doesn't get me off the hook, but does my share of ownership affect the penalty calculation at all, since the penalty is based on pecuniary loss?
Yes, it does. This is covered in Section 28.06, subsection E. If the actor, the person charged, can prove, by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning it's more likely than not, that they did give value for or had a legitimate legal interest in the damaged property, then the value of their interest must be deducted from the total calculated pecuniary loss.
Okay, let's walk through that with the boat example. The boat needs $50,000 in repairs. My partner and I each own 50%. I intentionally damaged it.
Right. So the total pecuniary loss initially is $50,000, the repair cost. You then prove you have a legitimate 50% ownership interest, which is worth $25,000. That $25,000 representing your share gets subtracted from the total loss. So the pecuniary loss used for determining the criminal mischief penalty level drops from $50,000 down to $25,000. This could potentially lower the felony grade. In this case, $50K might be a third-degree felony if it's over $30K, but $25K would fall into the state jail felony range, between $2.05K and $30K.
Ah, I see. So it doesn't eliminate the crime, because it still damaged my partner's interest, but it reduces the punishable amount of loss because, essentially, you can't be criminally punished for damaging the value you yourself own.
That's a very good way to put it.
Okay, for our final section, let's look at a few offenses that are tailored to very specific types of property or modern threats. First up, Section 28.07, interference with railroad property.
Yeah, railroads are obviously critical infrastructure, so they get their own dedicated section. And railroad property is defined really broadly. It's not just the trains and cars, but also the tracks, the rails, bridges, trestles, signals, and even the right-of-way land owned or used by the railroad.
And it looks like there are a couple of different ways to interfere. One involves targeting the trains themselves.
That's right. Throwing something at a train or rail-mounted equipment or shooting a firearm or other weapon at it. That starts as a Class B misdemeanor, which might seem a bit low, but
There's a catch, I bet.
there's a catch.
Yeah.
If doing that causes bodily injury to anyone, maybe the engineer, a passenger, someone nearby the charge, immediately skyrockets to a felony of the third degree. Once again, putting human safety at risk dramatically increases the penalty.
Makes sense. And the other category seems to be about physically messing with the tracks or property.
Yes. Just simple trespassing, entering, or staying on railroad property when you know you shouldn't be there. That's only a Class C misdemeanor, the lowest level offense. But if you actually tamper with the railroad property, if you place an obstruction on the track, or if you do something that causes a derailment, then the penalties completely shift back to mirroring the standard criminal mischief scale.
So it goes back to being based on the pecuniary loss caused by the tampering or obstruction.
Exactly. If your tampering causes, say, $5,000 worth of damage and delays, you're looking at a state jail felony, just like under the main criminal mischief statute for that dollar amount. It scales all the way up to a first-degree felony. If the economic damage is over $300,000, the cost of the disruption or repair drives the penalty level here. And there's an important exception noted. This doesn't apply to actual railroad employees or their authorized union reps who are doing things protected under federal railway labor laws. They obviously need to be able to access and sometimes interact with the property for work or negotiations.
Okay. Next, graffiti, Section 28.08. Now, we already saw that criminal mischief covers making markings on property. So why does graffiti get its own separate section if it's already covered?
That's a good question. While the base act is covered under criminal mischief, 28.03A3, this separate graffiti section, 28.08, does two main things. First, it specifically mentions the tools often use: paint, indelible markers, etching devices. But more importantly, it allows the law to create specific penalty enhancements based on the location of the graffiti, enhancements that don't apply to other kinds of criminal mischief.
Ah, the location matters more for graffiti.
Yes. The basic penalty still follows the pecuniary loss tiers of criminal mischief, but there's a special enhanced location penalty. The offense automatically becomes a state jail felony if graffiti is put on certain types of places. A school, an institution of higher education like a college, a place of worship or human burial, cemetery, a public monument, or a community center, provided the loss amount falls between $750 and $30,000.
So even if cleaning the graffiti off a church or a war memorial only costs, say, $1,000, which would normally be just a Class A misdemeanor because of where it was done, the charge gets bumped straight up to a state jail felony.
Exactly. The law is placing a higher value on protecting these specific public, educational, religious, or commemorative spaces from defacement, above and beyond just the simple cost of cleaning them.
It reflects a societal judgment about the significance of those places. Okay. Finally, let's get to the really modern one. Section 28.09, damaging critical infrastructure facility. This seems aimed at some serious, large-scale threats.
It absolutely is, and it's very specific about what counts as a critical infrastructure facility for this section, mainly electrical power generating facilities, substations, switching stations, control centers, that sort of thing. The power grid, essentially. And the bar for this offense is quite high. You have to intentionally or knowingly damage or impair the function of one of these facilities. And this is key. The damage has to actually cause an extended power outage.
What counts as extended? Is it like 5 minutes, an hour?
The law defines it. It has to be a significant disruption. Either the outage must last for 2 hours or more, or it has to affect 1,000 or more retail meters, basically 1,000 or more homes or businesses. So it's aimed at major disruptions, not minor flickers.
And if you cause that kind of major extended outage through intentional damage, what's the penalty?
The default offense level is a felony of the second degree. Very serious. But it can be elevated even further to a first-degree felony under 2 conditions. 1, if the pecuniary loss caused by the damage is huge, $100,000 or more. Or 2, and this is the really interesting future-focused part, if the person uses certain methods to cause the damage.
Yeah.
Specifically, a firearm, a drone, a cyber attack, or an explosive weapon.
Wow. Including drone and cyber attack right there in the statute for physical infrastructure damage. That's really something. It shows the law is trying to keep up with how these kinds of facilities could actually be attacked today or in the future.
Exactly. It's a clear signal from the legislature that they recognize the most potent threats to critical infrastructure might not involve someone physically breaking something anymore. It could be a remote attack via drone or a crippling digital intrusion, a cyber attack. They're putting those methods on par with using explosives, penalty-wise. #outro.
So wrapping this deep dive up, it's clear that property crime isn't just one thing. We've seen these core factors constantly shaping how the law views the severity.
Yeah, definitely 3 main takeaways, I think. First, with arson, it's all about the risk to life. Intent matters, yes. But targeting a habitation or a place where people gather, that skyrockets the penalty to first degree, often regardless of the actual dollar value of the damage. Safety first.
Right. Then second, for most criminal mischief and basic graffiti, it really does come down to the money, the pecuniary loss. Crossing those thresholds, especially around $2,500 and $30,000, is what pushes things into felony territory. It's primarily an economic calculation.
But third, the law uses those special enhancements to protect function and public safety over pure value. Damaging utilities, critical infrastructure components like copper, agricultural fences for variable livestock, or even using weapons against homes. These trigger felony charges, even at low dollar amounts, because the consequences of the failure or the inherent danger are seen as much more severe than just the repair cost.
So the whole framework seems designed to punish acts that don't just break things, but that actively endanger people or undermine the essential systems we rely on: power, water, commerce, safety in our homes. And the definition of what needs protecting keeps evolving.
It does. And that actually leads to a pretty interesting final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on. We just saw the law explicitly adding threats like cyber attacks and drones when talking about damaging physical infrastructure like the power grid. But think about how much of our economy and our lives now depend on purely digital systems and abstract forms of property. Things like cryptocurrency exchanges, complex financial data systems, maybe even blockchain-based ownership records. What happens when those abstract digital properties are damaged or maybe functionally destroyed by a hacker or some other malicious actor? Will we see future updates to this chapter, or maybe new laws that start treating the catastrophic disruption of major digital or financial infrastructure with the same kind of severity we currently reserve for burning down a building or blowing up a substation? How does the law adapt when the most valuable property might just be data? Something to think about, definitely, as technology keeps changing the landscape.